So when I got a call, and I wasn't looking, I got a call from a recruiter out of New York and said, I've got this startup company in Seattle, Washington, who's making a lot of noise in the wireless world. A guy by the name of Craig McCaw, who had taken his family's cable business and turned it into this wireless play in 19, I think he did it in 87. I got the call in 89, and they called me and said they're looking for a high-level marketing person.
Hey guys, welcome to the How I Got Here podcast. I'm your host, Travis Waters, and I designed this podcast to share stories that are worth telling. Whether it's about somebody going from zero to hero, hero to zero, or simply something in between. On today's episode, we're joined by Mr. Scott Hoyt. His career spans 30 plus years in marketing, and his fanaticism with fantasy sports by playing in a local league in the late 80s back in Seattle has now grown into what he's doing here, being a consultant for fantasy sports and sports betting early stage companies. Let's go ahead and jump into our conversation with him now. Enjoy. Hey guys, it's me, Travis, with the How I Got Here podcast. On today's episode, we are joined by Mr. Scott Hoyt. And Scott, for anybody that may not know you by name or by face, in as few words as possible, do a quick high-level overview of right now in 2025, just what you're working on, where you're at.
Yeah, and Travis, thanks for having me on. That's a pretty loaded question because a lot has changed for me in the last 6 to 9 months. One is my wife and I were living in Phoenix, Arizona, and decided to move back to Aiken, South Carolina, where we were about 6 years ago. And so we're in the middle of building a house again that we did in Arizona. And during that process, that timeline, I've become very involved with the FSGA. And through that relationship and association with them, I discovered that there might be an opportunity for me to contribute to this industry. And I launched a small little advisory company is what I would describe it. The best way to define it, Fantasy Sports Strategies. We launched it about a month ago, but it's been in the works for about the last 6 to 9 months. And so that has kept me very busy in terms of how to construct that, how to create that, and ultimately, how to help this industry grow.
And then for those who may not know what FSGA stands for, that is the Fantasy Sports and Gaming Association. That's an association and conference collective that I've been attending for 6+ years now. So if you are in the space, whether it's a content creator, actually literally any role possible in this space, definitely recommend it to look into that and check those guys out. So I always like starting this off by you tapping into the earliest memory that you can possibly recall, where that was the very first time where you knew or you started to think, this is what I want to do, or this is what I want to be when I grow up. So what was that very first idea, and roughly how old were you when you came to that conclusion?
Well, I think I could go way, way back, and for me, that's a long time ago. I grew up in a sports family. My mom, my dad, my brother, and I were all very much passionate around sports. I played sports, did a ton of sports things, and like everybody else did as a child. But as I grew up and I started to take that more serious in sports, I knew then that I was going to play a role in some sort of sports-related passion of mine. I didn't know when that would happen. I didn't know if that would be a full career out of it, or at some point would I make that connection and be part of this sports industry. And that's a wide ecosystem, as you know. I mean, that can take many different perspectives and angles. But I knew that sports was in my blood from really probably the time I played Little League baseball. And it never left me. And I think anybody who knows me personally will tell you that I probably only talk about sports in most of the conversations we have. So it was very young, very, very young when I had that passion.
So I know you mentioned Little League baseball and being in sports, then having that, I guess, that bloodline of sports. But when you had the idea, I want to do something in sports, was the initial idea on the athlete side of that, or is it more on the I want to be in the industry outside of the actual professional athlete concept?
Yeah, both actually. I played baseball, and really that was a dream of mine. It just didn't work out for various reasons. Injuries were probably the biggest part of that. But I always thought that in a career, I would always look at sports related opportunities. And back then, we're talking about in the 70s, there wasn't a whole lot out there that seemed to be a good fit for me. So I started to build my marketing career and always thought that at some point I would tap into or dip my toes into a sports related role. It just never materialized because I just had built a long history of marketing and branding and with some iconic companies. And I just didn't have, I don't think at that point I really had the time to make that pivot or that shift into that industry.
So,
But yeah,
what part of your player career, if you will, did the injury occur? And then this follow up question to that is how soon after, okay, professional athlete is not going to happen for me because of this thing that happened to me. So now let's look at something else. And then that's, like you said, the marketing came into play. So the first part is at what point, was it high school, middle high school? Were you actually playing sports in college? When did this injury occur?
my freshman year in college. Yeah, and so and I remember my dad always telling me that, make sure that you always have you can always pivot to a great education because the odds of you playing professional of any sport, the odds are against you. And so that was great advice. And when you get injured like that, you kind of lose your goal. And I actually took almost a year off of college because it was hard to kind of grasp with that. But through that, I found that there was this passion that I had for marketing and branding and just in that realm of it. I think that's when I decided that okay, I better make my education a primary focus of what I'm going to do going forward.
Now, you mentioned this was right at the start of your collegiate career. Did you already go to college with the concept of getting that marketing degree or that marketing skill set while you were still on the pre-injury thought of, let's see if I can be a pro player? Or, okay, let me make it easier. What was the first degree you were seeking pre-injury?
Liberal arts, because it was the at that time everyone said, "Well, that's the easiest major to pursue while you're really doing what you really want to do." And when that didn't materialize, I started looking at other areas that I thought would be, good from my background and my kind of my experience, my thought process, and I kind of latched on to the communication side, which then ultimately led me to the marketing side of things.
So we finished college with that marketing degree, and how soon after, I guess, after college did you land your first your role in the marketing space, or was it something that you were able to land prior to graduating college?
Well, a little bit of both. I mean, in college, when I went to Arizona State University, I went to ASU, and my senior year, they had companies that would come on campus to interview you if you were interested. And I was in the business school, they coordinated that. And so I actually did several interviews my last semester of my senior year. And one of the companies that had a high degree of interest in me and vice versa was Procter and Gamble. And so I stayed in touch with them. And I was a December grad. I wasn't a typical, because of that injury that I had, I took some time off and then went back to school. So I was a December grad. And I'll never forget this. My very first job offer was on Friday, the 13th of January, January 13th. And so the 13 is a lucky number for me. I was married on the 13th. I got my very first job out of college on the 13th. So I remember that date like it was yesterday.
I always, I find just where my brain went when you started talking about Friday the 13th is even though this comment I'm about to make isn't directly related to the date or the movie, it's so interesting how like a movie or a urban legend or something like that can like set your mindset of, oh, I don't want to do this on this date because Friday the 13th is a bad bad omen or anything like that. I know that we're going to get back to the story, but I want to share this. That literally yesterday or 2 days ago, the thought process, just speaking of 13th with like the 13th floor, I was like, wait a second, like, because like a movie or an urban legend exists, every skyscraper that's ever been created omits a 13th floor from building. Like, how crazy of a concept is that? That, like, that's just a worldwide known thing. Like, when you build it, you have to go from 12 to 14. Doesn't make any sense, but that's just,
Well, and I'm going to share another
yeah,
story
yeah,
with you.
go ahead.
2 days ago, 2 days ago, I'm booking my flights to the Vegas for the FSGA conference, and I started doing seat selections, and 13C was available. I took 13C on every one of my flights, every one of them.
Well, it's a lucky number, like you said, so it makes sense.
Yeah.
So we're now post college. We're in the marketing side of things. Kind of talk a little bit more about your first, I guess, your first job in the marketing space and how long did that last for?
Yeah, so I went to work for Procter and Gamble, as I said, and there. I think if you look back today, I don't think anybody could argue that Procter and Gamble is one of the most iconic branding marketing companies that ever existed. And they've changed over the times, but back then there was nobody better to work for than P&G. And so I went to work, started in really a sales role because they wanted you to learn the field. They want you to understand the products. They want to understand how those products are being accepted by consumers. For you to be able to market that, you need to understand that first. So I spent a couple of years in the sales side of it. Then I moved to Cincinnati and did some product management help. And from there, I went into a more of a product manager role, which is with P&G back in those days, that was the job to have. And so, from there, and I knew this going into it, because everybody told me, you work for P&G for 4 or 5, 6 years, you're going to get phone calls all the time for people who want to hire you. And that's exactly what happened. And I wasn't looking to leave, but when you have an opportunity, when you're that young, you tend to go where the opportunity goes that you think will advance your career and help you, learn and grow and all the things. Of course, back then, compensation was a part of it. I'm not going to fool anybody. And prestige is always an important ego thing, especially for, people like myself who, I'm kind of an extrovert. And so ego is a big part of my passion back then. And I was recruited then to Southland Corporation, which was 7-Eleven. And back in the late 70s, early 80s, 7-Eleven was exploding, and they wanted me to become what they call their West Coast for the franchise area of 7-Eleven. They had a marketing for all their franchise stores on the western part of the U.S. And that's what kind of defined my first 12 years of my career, was working for those both very iconic brands in a different way, but they're all B2C. So my early career was all B2C.
So during Procter and Gamble, during this 7-Eleven experience, if you will, were you always in like the back of your mind, like when you went to sleep at night, did you have like that sports itch of, okay, I'm having success, I like the role I have, the money's great, but how do I couple this with my sports fanaticism? Or was it something that you were just, crushing it in that role with that non sports appeal that you didn't think about it? So kind of what was your brain going? Because you said this was a pretty lengthy time. You said what the second job was, what, 7 years long?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so, I mean, the first 12 years of my career was really with those two companies. But I have to tell you that during that time, I'm still young, and I was playing what they call intramural baseball, softball. I was still doing those things that would keep me very active in the sports community, playing with friends of mine in, fast pitch league, for guys who didn't make it and wanted to do it, try it again and keep it going. So I managed a couple leagues doing that. And so sports was always a significant activity of mine after work. And so it always stayed in the forefront of my head. At Southland Corporation, we had an opportunity to partner with some sports sponsorships, of which I was very involved with, and loved doing that. We sponsored a couple PGA golfers, and so that started to give me a little bit of taste into the sports world that I always knew that eventually I would get into.
So before we kind of get to the next stage, post the Procter Gamble 7-Eleven tenure, I'm curious, which I kind of probably already know the answer to this, but I want to ask it anyway. So you mentioning you're an extrovert, you mentioning that you're doing these intramural stuff with other players who did not make it to the big leagues, whether it was injury related or just some other outside source, whatever it may be. Savannah Bananas, if this existed during this time, how heavy or hard would you have went to be a banana ball player because of the extrovert, because of you
Oh
having that
God,
baseball?
I watch that stuff all the time and think, oh, this would have been so much fun. They're like the Harlem Globetrotters of baseball. That would have been so much fun. But that never existed. Listen, I played baseball with
Yeah,
hard bats. There's no metal bats. There are wood bats.
yeah.
There were no metal bats when I was playing. So, sports has evolved and changed so much over the years, as you know.
I
But
just,
that would have been cool. That would have been cool.
yeah, Savannah Bananas. I absolutely love what they're doing, and the fact that they're exploding is, and then getting like ESPN airtime. Love
That is a
everything.
marketing marvel. You
Yeah,
want to talk about marketing? There it is.
I
There it is.
if you yourself aren't too familiar with my background, so prior to getting into the fantasy sports and sports betting space, 7 years hosting shows for Nickelodeon, to where I've had people like tag me or DM me or text me or whatever it may be, and they're like, the I forgot what the role is, but the like the MC of the games essentially. They're like, oh man, like this is sports, this is entertainment. Like Travis would crush this, and I think they opened it up prior to this last season, and I'm like, you know what? Even though I'm doing like 6 million hours of work on Player Prompts.ai, let me just see if that was. And I got pretty far, but yeah, it's just I feel like anybody on the extrovert even marketing side or entertainment side, I feel like everybody wants to be a part of what they've created over there because it's pretty sick.
Hey, if you do that, give me a call, will you?
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, I'll be blasting my schedule like this is my tour, this is my tour dates. But I think they looked at my availability and they're like, oh, this guy's way too busy for us to send him across the planet essentially. So anyway, back on track with
Yeah.
what you're doing. So after well actually why so you left Procter and Gamble for the 7-Eleven opportunity, and I'm assuming that was because they offered you a deal where you're like, yes, I'm going to take that, because you were kind of mentioning that you were young, and the money was definitely important. But leaving that job, what got you to leave that job? Was it something where like they were doing cuts, or did you get a better opportunity, and then what was that next opportunity down the road?
Yeah. So, going back to the Southland, from P&G to Southland, that was really about advancing my career because I was going to be running a very large franchise operation. P&G, I was running a couple products. So the scale and scope changed immensely. And with that comes obviously compensation. But for me, the most important part was that was an opportunity for me to advance my career. So when I got a call, and I wasn't looking, I got a call from a recruiter out of New York and said, I've got this startup company in Seattle, Washington, who's making a lot of noise in the wireless world. A guy by the name of Craig McCaw, who had taken his family's cable business and turned it into this wireless play in 19, I think he did it in 87. I got the call in 89, and they called me and said they're looking for a high level marketing person to run sales and marketing. And I said, well, sounds great, but I'm not even sure I could spell the word cellular, let alone let you know how that technology works. And they said that's exactly what they want. So I literally flew out to Seattle, and I was living in Phoenix, Arizona at the time. Flew out to Seattle, and I thought it was going to be the typical 1 2 hour interview with a couple people at the executive level. Turned into a day and a half of talking to people, looking at communities to live in, and next thing you know I come back and tell my wife we're moving to Seattle, and it was great. So and that was in 1989, and that was my second. I guess I carved my career into three parts. The first third is this B to C, great iconic brands, and then second part of my career, and you'll hear about it in a second, is really all about getting into technology and in spaces that was growing leaps and bounds. And the wireless industry, as we know it today, really, I think, has changed and evolved the way we think and the way we act. And so that was my first foray into technology, and I spent the next third of my career in technology.
Was that next third all with the same company that you flew to Seattle for?
Now, if you know anything about the wireless industry, it was a classic who's going to buy who and when and how and for how much. We were purchased by AT&T, of which I stayed on for a while and kind of helped with some of the conversion. And so worked with them. And I tell you a quick story about that is that when I was at McCaw, which was called Cellular One back then, I, uh, I put together a new concept of a retail storefront that you could come in and buy your cell phone and get your service and sign you up and all that kind of fun stuff. Well, that was the start of AT&T doing their storefront stores. When they saw that from us, they wanted to know how we did it, why we were doing it, and that was my claim to fame of helping AT&T get into the storefront. So that's a little bit, but yeah, I stayed with them for a while to help them with transition, and then I went into another wireless opportunity in the actually in the paging side, if you believe that. And paging back in the early '90s was growing faster than cellular because of the applications that were available to paging. And so I did that. I spent some time all over the place. The wireless industry, it was all about acquisitions and mergers, and recruiters were calling you left and right, throwing stock options at you and all that. It was a crazy, chaotic time. And I really went where the opportunity took me.
I mean, that's always a positive thing if you're always if companies are always trying to poach you for
Yeah, they
for
were. They were.
So when you moved to Seattle, did you still implement yourself in the local like intramural sports community? Still look for the opportunities for that?
Yes, yes, until I tore a hamstring playing intramural baseball. So yeah, I did that. But here's the funny thing is that in Seattle, and this is where my passion now started in fantasy sports. In 1989, when I moved there, I was the head of sales and marketing, and the local media guys, CBS, I know them well, still good friends of mine today. CBS local affiliate, one of their general manager came to me and said, "Hey, I'm starting this fantasy football league. You want to join?" And I said, "What are you talking about? What is this fantasy?" And so he kind of explained it to me. Well, you like football? I said, "Yeah, I watch it every Sunday. I'm a big Bears fan. I watch it all the time. I'm on direct TV. I got the satellite in my backyard. What are you talking about?" He says, "No, but this is called fantasy football." And that's, Travis, that's what started my passion for fantasy sports. And I tell this story all the time. 1989, with nine other guys in the media world in Seattle, Washington. That league still exists today. It's called the OBFL, which stands for Overbearing Football League. If you remember, Ken Behring was the owner of the Seahawks, and we called it Overbearing. It was an overbearing foot, and we still exist today. Now, not the same 10 members, but I'm one of the original, and there's three of us that are still original going, about 30 some odd years later. And that's what started my fantasy sports. Oh, it's just off the charts.
So I guess my first question is: do you guys have a league trophy that has like the one of those big ones where every time somebody wins, you put like the little placard card on it, so you have like 30 years of tracking like who won what year?
We did, and then somebody lost the trophy. We
Yeah.
couldn't. We said, okay, we're not going to do that anymore. And so we did at one point. I wish we had it. I wish we had it.
So this was early on in your move to Seattle, right?
That's correct.
So at what point did you essentially couple the like, hey, this is a cool like this thing, this new fantasy thing is cool. This is great. I'm having a great time. I mean, years and years of just playing with roughly the same team. That kind of tickles that funny bone of your sports fanaticism. You're still working in the like the wireless communications sector. At what point do you kind of take this new fascination with fantasy sports and decide that I want to actually do something more than just play in a league? Like how did that come to be?
Yeah, and I don't know if I think there was always that drive to want to do something in fantasy sports, but at that point, it was still a very evolving, still a very evolving. I want to call it a hobby for a lot of people back then. Because if you remember in '89, none of the technology and automation existed. We were faxing in lineups. We were going to USA Today on Monday and getting the stats. And you've heard all those stories. I'm one of them as well. What happened to me is that I played in one league, and then I got offered to play in another league, and then another league, and then another league, and another league. And so at one point, about 3 years later, I was playing in 5 different leagues. And it wasn't until the automation of this industry started to really take kind of my hobby, enthusiast to a passion. And I think it really transformed me. My wife will tell you as well. It's one of those things where um, every Thursday, Sunday, Monday was all about looking at fantasy football and fantasy sports. And football wasn't the only sport I was interested in. There was other ones. I played fantasy baseball as well for a long time. And so I never really thought in the back of my head that I would turn this into a business until probably maybe the end of 2008 or 2009 when I started to attend a lot of the higher stake events, high stake fantasy league events out in Las Vegas, as a matter of fact. It wasn't until then that I started looking at things that I could do. Because I knew that once I retired, I was going to do something in this industry. I just didn't know what it was at that point. I figured it would materialize when I got to that point.
So we kind of went from what was the what was the year that you said you went to Seattle? Was it about 89?
89, 1989.
So 89 you're in Seattle, and then we kind of jumped forward to mid early 2000s of when you started doing these high stakes leagues like you said in Vegas. From you, the company you started working for in Seattle up until the point where you were now doing high stakes league in Vegas, how many, I mean, I know that I guess how many companies would try to poach you is an infinite number, but how many different times did your not necessarily occupation, but did your company that you worked for shift from the company you worked for day one in Seattle to now you're doing a high stakes league in Vegas? Like how many things did we go through here?
Probably 4 or 5 different organizations through acquisitions and mergers,
Was it all
frankly.
in the wireless sector as
It
well?
was. It was. It was. In fact, I participated in, I want to say, it was 1999, maybe a little before that. I participated in the first FCC auctions, and they're auctioning off airwaves to wireless companies. Literally, we were in an auction in Washington, D.C., doing these auctions. And I remember the board telling me, you have $200 million to spend. And the FCC said, you only can have 3 of these channels. I came back to the board and reported. I said, I've got great news. I didn't spend all the 200 million. I only spent 198. I got $2 million to spare, but we had 3 channels. And the reason we were doing that is that this airwave was trying to build technology beyond simple paging. That's when I was in the paging side, what they call the narrowband, which is a narrowband pipe versus the broadband pipe. In narrowband, they wanted to take paging and make it two-way. And that's why these people were buying up the airspace to be able to adopt these services and these products in this space. And so I know that's not really sports related, but it kind of gives you a sense of my entrepreneurship. I was very involved in things, everything from big companies to startups and things like this. And I think that's where once I finally got into this space, that's kind of where I've leveraged my expertise.
Now, earlier you were saying that you knew once you started getting your feet wet with fantasy football that when you quote unquote retired, this is something you definitely wanted to focus more on. So now that we're in, I believe you said something maybe 2008 was at the high stakes league. Is that about
Yeah,
right? So when you're
yeah.
2008 doing the high stakes league, were you already out of the wireless industry? Did you retire by that point, and that's why you're doing the high stakes leagues, or were these kind of simultaneously still happening?
Still simultaneously still happening. I was still doing my career thing, still, doing a lot of my executive marketing things. Yet I was traveling and I was doing fantasy sports, and all my bosses knew about it. They loved it. I ran company leagues, so it was one of those things where everyone knew me, and that's where they all came to me for, fantasy football advice or fantasy baseball advice. And so it always was a passion, but I was doing it simultaneously.
So now we're were you on the, I guess let me ask this question first because it'll help define the timeline here from 2008 to now 2025. But at what point did you retire from the wireless industry, or just retire in general, I guess?
Well, I retired in generally about 5.5 years ago.
Okay.
So just right before COVID. Good timing.
So there's roughly 12 years from you starting to do these high stakes leagues to the official retirement. And I know you first referenced these high stakes leagues in Vegas as this is the start of me knowing that I have an idea of what I want to do in the space. So during those 12 years, how many years of these high stakes leagues did you actually put pen to paper and come up with your first concept, or actually your first company in the fantasy sports space?
Well, soon after 2008, I was playing in a high stakes league called the WCOF, which stood for World Championship of Fantasy Football. I actually won the main event in 2007, but back then the prize was only $150,000. Today it's $1 million. And another guy who's in the industry, I won't name names, but he and I started looking at buying the WCOF because we knew that there were some financial issues going on, and we just could never get right the financials from the WCOF because we couldn't reconcile what they were doing. So that was my first foray. I was going to get into the high stakes league business, and we poked around that business for 2 or 3 or 4 years, and the WCOF went belly up. I don't know if you know the history about that. Went belly up. They didn't pay a lot of their winners, and there's big, class action lawsuit, but never could find. You can't take money out of people who don't have it, and so that's what started. The FFPC, they were involved, NFFC is involved, and then there's another league, World Championship of Fantasy Football, WCFF or whatever, the one that runs at Circa. So there's 3 high stakes leagues, and I've had conversations with all of them about doing something, and I could just never find the right fit specifically. And this is when I was still working. And then when I retired 5 years ago, I started poking around a little bit more and a little bit more. And then it's when I got involved with the FSGA, because I thought, if I get involved with the FSGA, that's going to help me start to maybe frame some things that I've been thinking about over the years. So this has been a years of making, Travis, in my mind, that what can I do? Where can I contribute? But I want to do it smartly.
Yeah, so it's not having that idea day one of, oh, this is exactly what I want to do. It's let me keep essentially brainstorming on it. And then so I guess with the first ideas of trying to own the now defunct first high stakes league, and then trying to dip your toes in the pools of the other ones that came from the phoenix that rised from those ashes. What was, did you have like initial plans, or is it just wanting to own or be a part of those things? Like,
I wanted to own, be a part of it. And I approached and never could find the right, I never got any traction. Let's just put it that way. Couldn't get any traction on it because I think all the owners at that point were pretty much, they've already laid their plans out, and I don't think they were looking for any more, partners per se. And apparently they didn't need any money either, because I was looking to come in as an investor as well.
well, so when you were like approaching them as the investor side, were you kind of wanting to spin that marketing side of you, where it's like, hey, like I can come in and then these are things you're not doing yet that can explode it, and they're just like, nah, we're good.
That's the same dialogue. I mean, that is exactly, I said, listen, I've got over 30 years of pretty significant marketing and branding expertise that I think I can offer. And yeah, I got some traction there, but at the end of the day, it's just people don't really understand how marketing can benefit them, how branding can benefit them. I think there's a little bit more acceptance to that today. But back then, even then, 2007 through probably 2011, never really got any traction. But yet I stayed in touch with all those people, and I consider them, a lot of those, my friends, and they know who I am, and vice versa. And I played in their leagues and contributed to their leagues and won in some of their leagues. But again, it was through many of those conversations that got me to where I am today, which is why I created a little consulting group that I started.
So we've fast forwarded. We've jumped to 2020. You've been trying to dabble somewhat in the industry, not just as a player, but as somebody who's actually creating something. These high stakes leagues, these this whether it's full or partial ownership opportunities didn't come to fruition. It's 2020. You've now discovered and joined the Fantasy Sports and Gaming Association, which 2020 I think it was still technically Fantasy
It
Sports
was,
Trade
but I
Association. Yeah.
was not involved in. I didn't get involved in FSGA for about 2 years ago. So I
Okay.
talked to those people for a couple of years prior to that, but never really got involved.
So let's go to the first. What was the? You don't have to give me like the date and the month, but like what was the first point after starting to chat with FSGA members and starting to look more into what can I do, what can I create, what can I help with in the space? Did you actually have the aha? This is what it's going to be.
Vegas last year, when I went to the Vegas, and they, I don't know if I know you're familiar with the elevator pitch thing that they do. And you get up there and you give a 3 minute pitch on your new business. And these are creators, these are entrepreneurs, these are innovators up there. But there was a common denominator that I thought was potentially missing. And in some of those conversations that I was having with some of those people, it kind of, in my mind, kind of validated that. And that is, in some cases, these startups, these entrepreneurs are missing one element or two elements. One, it could be technology, it could be a strategy, it could be a marketing, it could be a branding, it could be a whole lot of things. And so I thought, well, can I help these? Can I advise these companies? And that's when the aha moment came to me. Now, do I want to be a big consulting company like a McKinsey or even a TopTal or Rick Wolf's big deal? I'm not none of that. No, that's not what I want to do. This is a there's three of us in this little company of mine, and we're just trying to help the small business, the entrepreneur, the startups. And I felt like there was a void, and I've got a lot of traction. I probably have talking to 12 to 15 companies who need that kind of advice.
I think it's very interesting that you credit the FSGA elevator pitch competition of February 2024 with the aha moment, because I don't know if you recall, but that is when the world first learned about playerprompts.ai.
I do.
I pitched in that.
I do. I remember. I absolutely do. So I do. And I always tell people there are some successful companies that went through that. And I tell these new startups, if you're not at the FSGA, you need to. And if you're not doing the elevator pitch, go do it. Get yourself ready and go do it. Because I can give you two good examples. Yours was one, and Price Picks was the other.
If only I could sell for a deal up to $4.6 billion like those guys. That's well, I was to say as well. I think so. I mean, PrizePicks easily the biggest company to ever pitch at
Yes.
well at the time side prize at
Yeah.
FSGA. But I would say I think number two is I believe they're called Dream 11.
Yes. Yeah.
They're probably I think they might be bigger than 4.6 bill. So those two are definitely the cream of the crops. But you also have to shout out Matt Walsh of Trophy Smack.
Yeah.
Those guys crushing it as well. Got one on
Yeah.
Shark Tank. Got a deal with Cuban. I would love to be coupled into that success story, but compared to them, I still have a little ways to go. But I do appreciate that collective coupling, if you will. But
Well,
so
let's put it this way, Travis. Time is on your side. I mean, you're in the right space,
yeah,
doing the right things.
I think so. That's kind of I mean yeah, everything's. I think most success stories are just based on timing, which like yours as well, where it's not like you doing the high stakes leagues in 2008. It wasn't the right time for you to do something in 2008, but you're like, okay, let me keep thinking, let me keep thinking. Then 2020, when you start talking to FSGA members and start learning about all that stuff, 2020 wasn't the right time because you didn't just based on what the industry was. And then now that the shifts that have made, and especially with the crazy amount of legalized gambling that has come since 2018, and now you see a pitch competition is like, hey, I mean, I not just on the consulting side, but then with your vast 30 plus years in marketing as well, which I mean, marketing is I think marketing is probably the most difficult part of everything that I do.
Yeah, it
Uh,
is.
so
Well, and I think what transformed this industry, better than anybody, is that when the betting integration became part of this industry because it started to blur the lines between fantasy players and the gambling side of it. And that's what has made this industry grow. It's a significant crossover and will be for many years. And that continues to explode what we're seeing in front of us. And I think that integration was an important piece of it. Technology played a lot of important, technology innovators played an important part of that ecosystem. Regulatory bodies played an important part of that ecosystem by allowing states to legalize. So there have been a lot of key points over the last 7, 8 years that has taken this industry to where we are today and where we're going to go.
So you had this idea from watching this pitch competition to create this consulting firm, consulting brand, and you said you're not the only person that's part of it. So did you approach people that are kind of already doing it in the space, or when you kind of started talking to the people that are now on your team, how did you essentially approach them with this is a much needed part of this industry, and I feel like we can help a lot of companies. How did that come to fruition?
Yeah, so my two partners it's a father-son duo. And the father I've known since my days in 1989 in Seattle. He was my PR firm that I hired in 1989. And we had a crisis. And he and his partner had a new PR firm, and I hired him. And he and I have become friends ever since. So he went to work for Microsoft as an executive for Microsoft. He retired about 3 or 4 years ago. When I started thinking about this, I said, you know what, I need a comms guy like Tom to help me. And he says, well, let me get my son involved because he is a digital content guru. I said, great. So it's his son who ultimately built my website, who's done a lot of my content stuff for me. It's going to help me with, just kind of social media and kind of doing all that stuff, things that I sometimes don't have enough time to do. But it's a father-son duo that has been great. And none of us have fantasy sports industry expertise. What we do have is subject matter expertise. And you can translate that to any industry if you're good at what you do. But it's going to take time. People got to trust that, hey, this little small consulting firm, they haven't been in the fantasy sports arena. How should we trust them? Well, it's going to take time. You're going to have to hear what we have to say, listen to what we, kind of what we do, and listen to how we go about things. And so I never once, Travis, made this about being like I said, I don't want to be a McKinsey. This is not a big, huge moneymaker. I have two simple goals. Number one is to help the small entrepreneur, whether it's a startup or somebody who is just trying to get their feet off the ground, or somebody that's gotten stuck in mud and need the help. And number two, help grow this industry. And if I make a little bit of money along the road, I'm good with that. But this isn't my livelihood. I'm done with my livelihood. I'm fine, but I don't need it to be, this big end all, financial thing. This is all about me helping the industry, and that's where I want my legacy to be in this particular thing that I'm doing.
So we've kind of caught ourselves up now to 2025. You're now still working with these two other players in the. So I know when you say that you kind of want to help I guess when we put quotations around the space, are you specific to the fantasy sports and sports betting, or is it simply just new founder, entrepreneur, early stage?
Nope, fantasy sports.
Specifically fantasy sports. So not
fantasy sports,
not sports betting.
Yeah, no, I take that back. Fantasy sports and sports betting, the ecosystem that makes up the whole FSGA.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So now that we've gotten to present day, what I like to do is I like for you to once again go back to past memories. There's a lot of things that are inside and outside of your control that we sometimes call the butterfly effect. Even though I have a pretty good idea of what your answer is going to be here, out of all of the things that have occurred to you, whether it was something you did not control or something that you did control, what do you attribute the number one most important butterfly effect to you getting to where you are today?
Joining the OBFL in Seattle, Washington in 1989. What I didn't realize then, which I now realize today, I didn't realize that fantasy sports would become a defining part of my life. And what turned what was really as a hobby evolved into this absolute true passion. There it is, right there. I tell this story all the time. 1989.
What did your wife say when you came back home and you're like, we're moving to Seattle?
Um,
Well,
I'm not
did
sure.
she? So I guess did you lead with we're moving to Seattle because I'm going to be making this much amount of money, or was it just hey, so pack your bags?
Well, she knew I was, so obviously she knew that I was flying up to Seattle to meet with this company. And I said to her, I said, I don't know where this is going to turn out to. Here's the other part that you don't know is we had only been living in Phoenix for about 4 years, and we had small kids. So we had moved them once already, but they were small enough that it didn't really ultimately matter. And so, at that point, I just said, hey, this could be a great opportunity, but I don't know what it's going to lead to. And then when I called her on the phone to tell her that, hey, guess what? And then when I came home, yeah, we didn't really have any significant ties that we had to stay where we were. It was an opportunity for me, and she was very supportive of that opportunity. But
I
it became kind of a funny story over the years because I did move around quite a bit. I could tell you all the cities that I've lived in, and it start. I'll give you a couple of them: Phoenix, San Francisco, San Diego, Seattle, Dallas, Boston, Northern Virginia,
I
and
remember
now Aiken, South Carolina.
yeah, I remember at one point before I guess I started creating my own company with Player Props AI here. There's at one point I want to say within the last like 8 or 9 years that I told my wife like if the money's good enough, I would live in Antarctica. So be prepared for that if somebody comes in with an offer for me to join them or whatever. But anyway,
Well,
I
she saw that my
yeah.
career was, I was getting calls all the time from recruiters, constantly, and there's sometimes I just said, I can't do that. I just got here. I'm not moving again.
I got you, but I do want to appreciate you for hopping on the How I Got Here podcast and sharing your story with us. For anybody who is on the entrepreneurial, whether they are pre-launch, post-launch, and they just want to get in touch with you guys in general, what's the best way to get a hold of you outside of LinkedIn, which we have your first and last name on the screen
Yeah,
here?
LinkedIn, any of the social platforms they could, but they can email me at scott@fantasysportsstrategies.com. Go to our website, fantasysportsstrategies.com. And you could call me on my cell phone anytime. I'll talk sports too if you want. Anything you want to talk about.
I feel like we could talk for hours about
We
sports.
could. We could. I know we could.
All
I
right.
know.
Well, if you guys enjoyed this, make sure you tune in to all of the other episodes coming out every Tuesday at 6 a.m. Eastern Time. Go watch the past ones. Go watch all the future ones. Make sure you subscribe to whatever network you're watching this or listening to this on. Again, Scott, thanks for joining us here, and we'll see you guys on the next episode.